Welcome to this edition of our weekly Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series. Don't go away just because Didi Logison is not here to open it. Arvana White, I apologize for her absence. She's on a mission, so we're carrying on without her. My name is Frank Gaffney. I am the Vice Chairman of the committee and delighted to be your moderator for today's program, which I believe will be one of the most important of this entire series, because it is an update on something we've covered, well, basically from the inception of the committee, as one of the single most important aspects of the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against our nation, whose purpose very explicitly is the destruction of the United States of America. These series of webinars have been substantially about various lines of attack that the Chinese have engaged in the course of that unrestricted warfare, going back decades, probably to the early 1990s. We were formally put on notice that that's what they were doing back in 1999, when two People's Liberation Army colonels published a book entitled, helpfully, Unrestricted Warfare, which, among other things, enumerated, as I recall, something like 20 different lines of attack that they would use, again, for the express purpose of taking us down. Our committee has been very determined to expose this ongoing warfare against America. It made all the more obvious because in May of 2019, the Chinese Communist Party, again, helpfully, published in the pages of its main propaganda outlet, People's Daily, notice that the Chinese Communist Party was initiating a people's war against the United States, in addition, as it happens, to the unrestricted kind. By that, they meant a total war, a total whole of society war against our nation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, like the unrestricted warfare that preceded it, continues to this day. Once again, for the same purpose. What we're going to be talking about in this program, and as I alluded to earlier, have been really along the years that we've been doing these programs and others under the banner of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, is the outrage, the travesty, to say nothing of the strategically disastrous fact that we're paying for much of that warfare against us. You know, Lenin famously talked about the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will hang them. The Chinese have taken it one step further. They know that the capitalists of Wall Street will finance the purchase of the sale of the rope with which they will hang us. We're very excited to have with us really an A-team of presenters who will be talking about various aspects of this, starting with the man who, I think it's fair to say, really created an understanding of both financial warfare's offensive applications. In fact, he helped Ronald Reagan design such a war strategy for taking down the Soviet Union back in the day. His name is Roger Robinson. He served as the Senior Director for International Economic Affairs in the Reagan National Security Council. He's gone on to a number of other important good works, including serving as both the chairman and the ranking member of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. These days, he's the chairman of the Prague Security Studies Institute, which has been doing some indispensable research in this particular arena of the underwriting by Wall Street of our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party. We spoke with him earlier in the day. He's joining us by video from Europe, and we're very appreciative of him helping essentially to set the stage for an update on what has been going on in this financial warfare battle space, the extent to which the Chinese Communist Party has benefited from enormously, and at the detriment, I should say, of American investors who have not been well served by their fund managers, the people they entrust their savings and college funds and other investment portfolios to in the New York capital markets. We're going to go to Roger Robinson at this point with great appreciation for his leadership for many years in this space and others, and for his contribution to this program today. Let's go to the videotape.
Well, Frank, there have been some extraordinary developments over the last 48 hours, I can tell you, with Chairman John Moolenaar of the House Select Committee taking it upon himself to issue subpoenas for Jamie Dimon and Brian Moynihan of JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America, respectively, for their non-cooperation, as he put it, in the effort to forestall their proceeding with a $5.2 to $5.4 billion IPO of Cattle, which is the large battery giant of China that is on the Pentagon list of Chinese military companies and has a record of trafficking in slave labor as well. It is a corporate bad actor as designated by the United States government. And not surprisingly, the committee wanted to understand why, even out of Hong Kong, you'd have American banks leading the management of this IPO. It was felt to be completely inconsistent with the president's America First investment policy pronouncement that he signed off on in February of this year. So we have the president's taken a position on Chinese military companies, which is no way, no how they should be involved in any way, shape, or form with U.S. investors. And that clearly means U.S. banks as well. So that's the state of play. And I would guess that this has been a surprise for these two major banking institutions. I would imagine that it's going to have a chilling effect on others that were thinking to use this loophole, what I affectionately now call the Hong Kong IPO highway, which is a way to circumvent Chinese companies, particularly the military tied variety, coming to the New York Stock Exchange or to NASDAQ, which would be a very sporty proposition, and an unwelcome mat would likely be out. So, of course, they use Hong Kong, a wholly owned subsidiary of China, and our American banking institutions, our law firms, our consulting firms are lining up eagerly to do this business. And right now, for example, after the cattle deal went forward against the wishes of the Congress on a bipartisan basis, at least the China Committee of the House, 13 Chinese military companies, by our count, have lined up and applied for IPOs in exactly the same venue as the cattle IPO. Now, this is obviously not a coincidence. The water was deemed fine, and the green light was out, and the highway was officially opened. And now it's going to be trafficked by all manner of Chinese PLA-tied companies. Now, is this okay? Clearly not. This is against the spirit and the letter of the president's America First investment policy. It is contrary to everything that the House Select Committee has done since its inception. And it is quite frankly a spit in the face to those folks that have tried to maintain a security-minded risk posture, as well as human rights, because this can affect share value, corporate reputation. It translates into an unacceptable fiduciary risk scenario, frankly. And that is the concern of the SEC and Treasury and the National Economic Council at the White House. And yet you don't hear much from them on this. It was left to the Congress to try to be the blocking agent. And now there are questions that these companies, these big banks, JP Morgan Chase and B of A have to answer to. So this comes on the heels of also another terribly problematic issue, which is the Public Company Oversight Accounting Board, PCAOB, that's a function of the SEC, that cut this sweetheart deal in May 2013 with the Chinese Securities Regulatory Commission. And it gave them a waiver on U.S. government audits and other U.S. securities laws so that they didn't have to meet the same rigorous criteria as U.S. companies and every other foreign company in the world except China. With 30 days notice, we could have been out of this thing. It's frankly amazing that we're still in it. And it was revised with what I think is a fraudulent, unworkable fix in 2022, somehow thinking that Hong Kong was the answer in terms of conducting audits. It might as well be Beijing or Shanghai, as we all know. Hong Kong is now just another Chinese city. So our work is cut out for us. These companies should not be listed on U.S. exchanges when they're contravening U.S. federal securities laws. They're unregulated. They're pulled directly from Chinese exchanges. They are laden with military and human rights violators. And that's the kind of thing that we can expect if there's no action on this matter. And when we're talking about the PCAOB and the China Securities Regulatory Commission and the possibility of having these companies that are improperly in our markets delisted from U.S. exchanges, we need to keep in mind that that's only 286 Chinese companies that are in the New York Stock Exchange and in NASDAQ. Is that the universe of companies that are listed or traded in the United States? Far from it. There are, last count, some 900 Chinese companies in the over-the-counter market. And catch this, in the A-share market, and I'll explain that in a moment, there are as many as 4,000 Chinese companies traded in our exchanges, particularly through index funds like exchange-traded funds, mutual funds, and the like. Now, what are A-shares? Well, A-shares are Chinese companies listed only on domestic Chinese exchanges. They've never seen the regulatory light of day in the United States. They've been brought into our markets through an unguarded, surreptitious backdoor of allowing U.S. index providers like MSCI, like FTSE Russell and Dow S&P, to simply add these companies by the hundreds in some cases to the list of the companies that are included in their index. Well, the problem with an index is that asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street come along and they build exchange-traded funds and investment products directly from those indices. And that's what we, the American people, some 75 million or more of us, are investing in. Unregulated A-shares, many of them tied to the People's Liberation Army and egregious human rights abuses. The moral of the story here is, don't concentrate on just listed Chinese companies. It's those 5,000 Chinese companies that are traded on U.S. exchanges that have to be scrutinized and in many cases removed from our markets for fiduciary, national security, and human rights concerns. And until we get to those much bigger numbers this is all playing into Wall Street's game of trying to limit almost unrecognizably the number of companies that are under scrutiny and at risk of being delisted. It's traded companies, not listed companies, that you have to pay the most attention to. And I think finally we're in the process of getting our arms around this. So I think that we're facing a moment of truth now where John Moolenaar, who's to be immensely commended for his courage and fortitude and tenacity in pursuing this subject, and seeing it through the way he is, and not taking no for an answer or allowing these folks to slip the noose on their fiduciary obligations to U.S. investors. It's not just about U.S. investor protection, which is an awfully big subject and a big part of it, but it's also our national security and our fundamental values, read our human rights policies. So I think we are closing in on Wall Street and their friends within the administration, some of them U.S. government regulators that are somewhat conflicted on some of this. At least it certainly has been the case in the past. I'm hoping it's not the case in this Trump administration, and I'm encouraged so far that that's not going to be the case. So let us watch, but it is time to end the money-oriented free lunch program that has moved over time in the last couple of decades trillions of dollars with a T of investment funds of the American people directly into the coffers through these state-owned companies and other CCP-controlled companies into the coffers of the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. This is wholly unacceptable, and I'm encouraged that it's gradually we're getting a handle on this and holding the responsible parties to account. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger Robinson, most especially for your leadership in this space. I cannot tell you how impressive is your body of work and the extent to which it is now bearing palpable fruit. And I join you in saluting Congressman John Moolenaar in his role, especially as chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, we have a very special treat. We had an opportunity to interview the congressman on our television program, Securing America, which can be heard on the Real America's Voice Network. We, with permission, are reprising his interview in its entirety for the purposes of this program. It's 15 minutes long, a little longer than normal, but I think extraordinarily content-rich, with insights both into what is prompting him and his colleagues, by the way, on a bipartisan basis, now to become increasingly insistent that we must end this obscene practice of enabling, enriching, empowering the people who have made no secret of their intention to destroy us. We'll go to the video now with my appreciation to the congressman for allowing us to make a twofer of this very important interview on Securing America. Let's go. Welcome back, and a very sincere, heartfelt, and enthusiastic welcome to our next guest. His name is Congressman John Moolenaar. He represents the people of Michigan in the United States House. He has the distinction of being the chairman of the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, for shorthand, and is doing an extraordinarily impressive job in both helping his colleagues and the American people understand the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, for one thing, and the threat that it represents to us, in particular in the form of what the CCP calls its unrestricted warfare against the United States. The committee's work is all available on their very, very informative website. But one thing that has really caught our attention is the work that the chairman and I think in a great many cases on a bipartisan basis, his committee have done in challenging what I consider to be the single most serious aspect of this unrestricted warfare, and that is getting, with the help of Wall Street, our money to underwrite it. And the chairman has been engaged in some very important conversations with people on Wall Street, in some cases in written form. And we wanted to catch you up on what he's been doing, and it's really momentous significance. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for coming back to Securing America. It's great to have you with us. We're going to use this video for the, I think, very timely conversation we will be having as our Committee on the Present Danger China convenes one of its webinars on this issue of, well, the guys on Wall Street who are wanted for underwriting the enemy. You're great to spend some time with us. Thank you, sir. Back.
Well, thank you for having me, Frank. It's good to be with you once again.
Wonderful. Well, let me start by just setting the stage a little bit. You've been prominently featured on Maria Bartiromo's show, and I think a special that she did on this issue of underwriting the enemy with some of your colleagues on both sides of the aisle. You are certainly familiar with a very important national security presidential memorandum that President Trump issued back on February 21st, I believe, of 2025. He called it the America First investment policy. Would you talk about what's wrong with a China First investment policy, which seems to be what guys on Wall Street have been pursuing for some time now?
Well, I thank you, Frank, and I commend President Trump for his leadership putting out the America First investment policy memorandum, and we're working hard to codify that in Congress because we want to make sure in the future that we, as administrations change, as, policies change, if Congress puts it into law, that's something that will stay. And it's going to be very important that we codify that policy. A couple of bills have been introduced, one in the Senate, one in the House on that topic. But the bottom line is we should not be underwriting the military expansion of our foremost adversary, and American taxpayer dollars, American investor dollars should not be going to benefit companies that are affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, and especially those who are affiliated with the People's Liberation Army. They are expanding their military efforts dramatically, and unfortunately, in many cases, American investor dollars are being used to finance that effort.
And, this is such an important point. Is it an exaggeration to say that we are making possible, or certainly greatly enabling, this, some have described it as the greatest peacetime military buildup in history?
I believe it is a unbelievable military buildup. It's that China is on a wartime footing. They have, Xi Jinping has told his military to be ready to take Taiwan by force if necessary as early as 2027. When you look at the dramatic capabilities and their expansion in shipbuilding and in drones and even space technology, they're trying to catch up in AI. They're investing heavily in hypersonic missiles. They're dominating the battery space right now. And so you can see they are very strategic in their efforts, and they will leverage things like critical minerals and other, important manufacturing inputs to slow us down or to leverage us in different ways.
You mentioned batteries, Mr. Chairman, and I'm so glad you did, because one of the things that has been a focus of your efforts of late has been trying to prevent two of the major companies on Wall Street, J.P. Morgan, headed up by Jamie Dimon, and Brian Moynihan's Bank of America, from helping to raise billions of dollars for one of those companies, actually identified as by the Pentagon as a Chinese military company operating in the United States. Cattle is its name, and it's the largest battery manufacturer in the world. You happen to know something about it by virtue of course, their efforts to do some manufacturing of those batteries in your native state of Michigan. Tell us about your concerns on the score of cattle, if you would, sir.
Well, we reached out to these two American companies, these banks that are funding the IPO of cattle in the Hong Kong market. And we reached out back in April, encouraged them not to do that, and presented evidence to them of cattle's ties to the Chinese military, even cattle's ties to slave labor in their supply.
Yes.
And, we requested information in writing. We reached out in good faith to inform them of these concerns. And unfortunately, they went ahead and continued this process. We've reached out again and requested information. And they basically, when Congress, reached out for accurate information to help us set policies, they sent us press clippings, basically public information that was available anywhere. And the bottom line is this: we need to know what kind of, they say they did due diligence on these investments. We need to know what that was based on. Was it based on assurances from the Chinese Communist Party that they're not affiliated with the military?
Yeah. Trust us. Mr. Chairman, I want you to drill down a little bit more on that on the other side of a short break. We'll be right back, folks. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Chairman John Moolenaar of Michigan is in the House virtually. I couldn't be more pleased to say. He is the distinguished leader of, I think, one of the most important committees in the United States House of Representatives at the moment. It is a select committee impaneled for the purpose of helping the rest of us understand and develop policy, if not actual legislation, hopefully both, on how do we contend with the threat we face from the Chinese Communist Party. And Mr. Chairman, I hated to interrupt you, but you were on a roll. You were asking Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan and Brian Moynihan of Bank of America personally to answer an extremely well done, detailed letter. I think you had 20 or 21, something like that, questions that we really have a need to know the answers to about specifically their involvement fundraising for a particularly dangerous Chinese company. I understand they're putting advanced batteries in submarines that may be used to destroy our Navy in the Pacific. Could you comment on that and how they've been responding to your request for information?
Well, the Pentagon has designated cattle as you pointed out, a Chinese military company. The Commerce Department recently came out and confirmed that as well, because of course cattle is suing in court trying to get that designated change.
Right.
And so it's important that we presented that information to J.P. Morgan Chase. We presented it to Bank of America, and we asked them the question: what is your due diligence? How do you know that your investors are not investing in an entity that's partnering with the People's Liberation Army? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, trust us. We've done our due diligence. And we said, that's not good enough. We need to know. And so I've subpoenaed them for information on their due diligence, because ultimately their shareholders, the general public, deserves transparency. We don't want our investor dollars going to fund the military of our chief adversary. And there are consequences when this happens. And so we're subpoenaed them. That happened just yesterday. And we expect answers. And we're going to continue to get the truth. And we are going to continue to build policies that prevent this in the future, because ultimately this IPO that's done through Hong Kong is the tip of the iceberg. And if we allow this to continue to go forward in this fashion, we're going to see more and more of this, and we're going to have people's pensions and their life savings and their investors' dollars going to fund entities that actually could use this and the best technologies against our men and women in the armed forces.
Amen. Well, again, your clarity on this, Congressman, is so appreciated. It's not been much in evidence, I'm sorry to say, from successive presidents, not just this one, but apart from this, presidential memorandum, they call it, the administration has seemingly been willing to sort of turn a blind eye to all of this. And I just wanted to draw you out on how consequential what JP Morgan and Bank of America have done in this case is, both with respect to enabling cattle to raise immense amounts of money, but also perhaps, as you've suggested just now, creating kind of I think it's been called a highway for lots of other companies, perhaps A shares that are also going to use this sort of end run on the American first investment policy through Hong Kong. Could you comment on the implications of this for the future?
Well, for sure. And I want to look at it from the standpoint of investors, because they are trusting these American leaders, these bankers, and they are at risk of their reputation. They are at risk of regulatory risk. They are at risk of these investments are opaque.
Yes.
So you have very little understanding of what's actually happening with these Chinese companies. And so they are putting...
I suspect most American investors have no idea they've got money in these companies.
I think you are exactly right. And I think it's important that we have transparency and disclosure requirements. And we highlight these situations where cattle is on a known list by the Department of Defense and the Commerce Department as a Chinese military company. And for the Bank of America, for JP Morgan Chase to simply ignore that, to me, is at risk for their entire shareholders and people who trust them to make their investments for their future.
Would you go so far as to say, sir, that especially if, God forbid, we get into a shooting war with the Chinese Communist Party, that those investors could lose everything they've got in China?
You know, we've seen how the CCP is willing to leverage anything. They will leverage, students in this country that are Chinese nationals because of their national security laws. They will threaten their families. For sure, they will use every bit of leverage they can to defeat our goals. And so I think, every investor ought to be asking the question, are my investment dollars going to fund Chinese companies that are in some way partnering with the CCP and the People's Liberation Army?
Yeah. And I so appreciate the nuance there. It's a civil military fusion policy of the Chinese Communist Party, as well as the direct support for these PLA companies, that is so concerning. Could I ask you one last question, sir? I know that one of your other very important initiatives is you've asked Paul Atkins, the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and his counterpart in the Public Company Oversight Accountability Board, to come to brief the committee on their role in enabling some of this through a practice of essentially a preferential sweetheart arrangement with the Chinese Communist Party. I've got just 15 seconds. Do you think that policy should end, sir?
I do. I think we're in constant conversation, and I believe that our committee will get the answers, and we're going to work towards improving our policies and work with the Trump administration to get this right.
Perfect. Congressman, God bless you. Godspeed in your great work, and please come back with updates, if you will, as soon as possible. This is truly the Lord's work. Thanks to the rest of you for joining us. I hope you'll do it again next time. Until then, go forth and multiply. Well, I hope that members of Congress will multiply like John Moolenaar's example argues for. And I do want to just impress upon you all this point. Under his leadership, there has been a very considerable degree of bipartisan support for ending this practice of funding the enemy. And don't take my word for it. Mention was made by me, I think, there, this very impressive special that Maria Bartiromo did on Fox Business, also aired actually outside of the paywall in Fox Nation's paywall. But it had quite a number of members, Democratic members included, of this select committee, speaking forcefully about the insanity, really, of what we've been doing, making all the more important its ending through codification, if possible. We are going to switch gears from talking about the investors and their stakes that are very much on the line in this kind of practice, notably in connection with the cattle deal and the precedent it has established for others through this bank shot, this highway, if you will, in Hong Kong. And we're going to talk about the national security implications of it. And who better to discuss that with than a man who has devoted most of his professional life trying to understand the threats to our national security posed by the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, I think it's fair to say he has been probably the single most astute, courageous, and accurate of those who have been raising an alarm as to what's coming, the intent of the Chinese Communist Party, and increasingly their capabilities to act on it. And that would be Captain James Fennell, United States Navy, retired. No stranger to these webinars. He's a very active member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, as well as participant in not only these programs, but many, many others as well, including my show, Steve Bannon's, and others that I'm sure you're familiar with. Captain Fennell is the co-author with Dr. Bradley Thayer of a very timely book entitled Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. We asked him to talk a bit about what it means for our military, the lives, not least, of the men and women who are its most important components, but also for the rest of us here at home, quite possibly, that we have been enabling the Chinese People's Liberation Army to amass a truly first world military power, especially in light of the fact that they are making no bones about it, that it will be used against us if they so choose. Let's go to the video with Captain Fennell, who also spoke on my program on Thursday, and we're very pleased to have him with us by video.
Well, Frank, this announcement that you just read off about the investment and the billions that are being poured in by Americans' businesses into Hong Kong, which thus go into the People's Republic of China, eventually finds significant portions go into the development of the People's Liberation Army. And let me just give you an example. In the United States today, we're having serious debates in the Pentagon about whether or not we can sustain keeping aircraft carriers in our United States Navy, something that we developed and perfected over the course of the last 100 years and used quite effectively to win World War II. We're debating that because most people in DC say, well, there's just not enough money, so let's cut something that costs a lot. Whereas in China, they're doing the exact opposite. They're going into full-scale production of a carrier fleet. They now have their third carrier, which has completed 9 sea trials and is now getting ready to field its first advanced stealth fighter, the J-35, which has now been viewed on Chinese websites here over the last couple of weeks, indicating with its identification paint scheme that it's going to be flying on and off aircraft carriers for the Chinese Navy. So in the space of just 12 to 15 years, the Chinese Navy went from having 0 aircraft carriers to now having 3, one that will have the most advanced electromagnetic aircraft launch systems with stealth fighters that are close to our F-35s, not exactly on par, but pretty close, along with ballistic missile submarines that are powered by nuclear propulsion, fast attack nuclear submarines, the largest cruisers in the world with 112 vertical launch system anti-ship and anti-carrier ballistic missile silos, the most advanced rocket force in the world beyond even the Russian arsenal. And we could go on with space and across the board of the military domain. That China has been able to do this in the course of 10 to 25 years. And the reason they were able to do that is because guys like Jamie Dimon and these others continue to provide them the money that does this. So I think we need to, we're talking a lot in America today about the T word, the treason word. And we know that some people have actively worked against the will of the American people. I think we should be asking ourselves what it is that these American, quote unquote, American companies are doing to prop up not just the Chinese Communist Party, but to give them the funds to allow them to be able to develop and build a very robust and lethally capable military that seeks only one thing, which is to destroy the United States of America and to first push us out of the Pacific and then to go from there. And I am a little bit worried. I saw also today that yesterday there was the announcement about we're going to sell, we sent our, the CEO, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, over to China for a Chinese conference. And our Mr. Lutnick was there, and he said that, we won't sell them our best, we won't sell them our second best, we won't even sell them our third best. We're just going to sell them our fourth best. And he said that's the thinking, which is that we want to sell Chinese enough that their developers get addicted to American technological stack. And that's the mindset in Washington, which is to say, well, we can keep them in a market where we can benefit from that. And I don't disagree with that capitalist mindset, but it is devoid of understanding of the Chinese Communist Party and how they will use those funds to turn around and to attack us and develop and destroy us. And oh, by the way, just so that Mr. Lutnick is aware, today in the China Daily, they have a full article on it called What's Behind NVIDIA's Charm Offensive. And after they go through and they talk about the details of the chips that will be sold, the H20 versus the Chinese chips from Huawei, the ASEN 910 Bravo, they say, the Chinese say, it doesn't matter what happens, we know what's coming, and so what we, the Chinese Communist Party, have to do is we have to diversify and localize. So the Chinese are, no matter what Mr. Lutnick thinks and desires the Chinese to do, the Chinese have already said, we're going to get off your dependency on your chips. And people can say, well, they don't have the technology, they don't have the skill set. Well, let me tell you something. They just fielded this J-35 stealth fighter with their own organic engines. And 10 years ago, people were saying that Chinese couldn't develop their own organic aircraft jet fighter engines. They are today. They said all kinds of things. They could never produce an aircraft carrier. Now they have 3 of them. They can't produce ballistic missile submarines. They're producing them. They can't produce fast attack nuclear submarines. They're producing them. So the Chinese, regardless of what our strategy is and our brain trust says back in Washington, the Chinese Communist Party already has a strategy, and they're telling us we're going to get off having to use NVIDIA and any American TSMC chips from Taiwan, and we're going to be the lead producers of the most exquisite and exotic and super fast wafer thin chips in the world, and we won't need you. So why are we continuing to fund them in the meantime so that they can get the tools and the weapons and the munitions, which we are depleted our own stockpiles in the Ukraine? Why are we continuing to fund them and not fund ourselves to be prepared to deter them from attacking us? That's the real issue, and I just don't understand it, and I hope that this Congress and this administration wake up to the real threat. And sometimes you got to understand the ideology of your enemy, and these are devoted Chinese communists that hate us, hate capitalism, hate America, and they want to destroy us. And if we think that we can fish with them and lure them along so that they'll continue to provide us some small scratch here, it's ridiculous. And I'm sorry, I support the president, I support the administration wholeheartedly, but in this area, we need to wake up and not be so naive.
Thank you very much, Captain. As ever, a clarion call to both wake up and take appropriate action. And that's what we're all about here at the Committee on the Present Danger of China. We're going to turn next to Ron Armstrong, a man I have come to admire tremendously for his capabilities as well as his track record in taking action, notably in his native state of Michigan. In fact, our first introduction to Congressman Moolenaar was through Ron's good offices. He is the president of a marvelous grassroots organization there called Stand Up Michigan. We have been partners in any number of public policy struggles, catalyzing, we hope, good policies. And I've come to admire tremendously both his common sense, his ability to communicate complex issues to ordinary folks, as well as to lead in taking concrete action. And we're delighted to have him here to give us, among other things, an appreciation of Congressman Moolenaar from one of his fellow Michiganders, and the kind of work that he's about at the moment, particularly with respect to trying to end the underwriting of our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party. Ron, welcome back. Over to you.
Great to be with you, Frank, and I thank you for having me join. I am just.
Oops, I think you muted it there somehow.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm always amazed at the knowledge that is given and provided at these webinars, and the experts that you are able to have come on and are willing to come on. I also wanted to talk specifically about John Moolenaar because, John was battling the Goshen fight before the select committee appointment ever happened. And through that process, he learned a great deal about how Chinese companies are always owned and operated by the Chinese Communist Party. They always answer to, and their board members are basically required to report back, provide technology, and really undermine whatever it is, or to capitalize, if they would, on our market, our technology, and ultimately to control the aspects of the American economy. I mean, when you look at the battery plants, when we originally were talking about this, they controlled the rare minerals, they controlled the battery manufacturing, and now we had the left basically deciding that we were going to be in a mandated situation potentially for us to be able to move or to drive vehicles, and we were going to be dependent on the Chinese Communist Party providing those raw materials and those finished batteries. And as John learned this, as well as the acquisition of farmland that was in this rural area of Michigan, was being taken against the will of the people who live there, we're being subsidized by our own tax dollars in order to do that. And through this process, I think that John realized there's something really wrong here. And when he had the opportunity to move into the select committee, I think one great thing, having spent 20 years of dealing in the political realm, if you will, it is a rare occurrence to have congressmen who are open to not only new ideas and new information, but are willing to embrace and implement that new information, willing to listen to experts who have maybe history in different areas and are willing to act on it, have hearings on it, create not just dialogue and joining seminars and webinars like this, but being able to get some interest across the aisle. And that's one thing that I think is really important for John's position, is when it came to the World Health Organization, he was able to do the same thing with getting people on both sides of the aisles, not just so-called rhino Republicans, but Democrats who were willing to, basically he has the respect of his colleagues. And that's something that is also rare. He isn't doing this for personal gain, financial or otherwise. He truly has been put in this position, not as a stepping stone to some other position, and just following through and putting themselves, as they often do, on a platform that is above the people, that is above the experts, that really are just following along politically, as we could say. And what you had and experienced in these last few minutes, Frank, was an understanding, that executive order of the president. First of all, it's an America First policy, but then it's an America First investment policy. And those two things go together, but you have to look at how they go together. And really, both of those things are undermined by what it is these banks are looking to do. And that is take American money that is invested in these banks. Now, they would use words like capitalistic, free market. We are really answer to our shareholders. No, you answer also to the people of America, and you cannot be taking their investment and their money and undermining and providing those resources to our enemy in order to not just provide services and or benefit people financially, but to infiltrate us at every turn, whether it is in our food supply, in owning our farmland, and the Chinese nationalists that are in America, Frank. Those people are here for a reason. It is to undermine us. It is to sabotage us, our food supply, to basically take over in areas that, of course, we cannot handle and shouldn't be involved in. I think the subpoena is a brilliant piece of work, and I certainly hope that they follow through with this in regard to hearings, and that the codification happens at the House and Senate. And I do believe it can happen with bipartisan nature if it is framed in the right way. And Frank, I've got to thank you and your group, because you have been the ones that have kept this at the forefront, fighting when others were trying to look at identifying enemies who truly are not the enemy that the Chinese Communist Party is today.
Thank you, Ron, very much. And I just want to go back at you. You mentioned John Moolenaar's leadership on the WHO issue, the global governance scheme. You've been an outstanding contributor to the work we've done in another of our partner organizations, the Sovereignty Coalition, trying to push back on that, and so deeply appreciate his leadership in that space as well as yours. So thank you for this important sort of insight into the man, as well as the role he is playing at the moment in your state, as well as at the national level. We hope, though he's not seeking it, that he will go on to bigger and better things, because he's an extraordinary leader and very much needed at this moment. I'm delighted to say we have one final contributor. Like Ron, she was press ganged into contributing by me at the very last possible moment, and we're always delighted that she invariably rises to the occasion brilliantly. I had the privilege of being with her last weekend in Los Angeles for a program sponsored by her American Freedom Alliance, along with two of our other great colleagues, Robert Spencer and Trevor Loudon, on the issue of what we call the red-green, well, now blue axis as well, throwing in the globalists into the mix. Karen Sigeman is the president of the American Freedom Alliance. She is also a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, and she does as good a job as anybody I know in terms of both marshaling content, making it accessible to people through her own splendid programs. And I strongly urge you to check them out at AmericanFreedomAlliance.org, but also synthesizing information in ways that provide takeaways from programs like this. So we're really thrilled that she was able to join us. Dr. Sigeman, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Frank. And yeah, glad to participate however I can, as you know, in such an unbelievably important mission at such a crucial time. I had a few thoughts, of course, listening to the unbelievable experts. The first thought I had was, last year we did a road show in which you were completely instrumental. We essentially partnered with the Committee on the Present Danger China to bring to the country the imminence of really potential catastrophe related to China. We called the conferences World War III or World War Z, highlighting the peril that we are in and that we face due specifically to the Chinese Communist Party, which has declared people's war on us, unrestricted warfare, total whole of society war from every single quarter. What we wanted to alert people to was that we needed a man in the White House who understood the perils. And we got that. And our current president, President Trump, also put forth this America First investment policy exactly as one would have hoped. Who would have thought, though, that the battle wages on within our own society here, within our banks, within our markets, within various corporations, that this still we have enemies within, and there's really no question about that. Every one of the panelists speaking before me, essentially, we're saying that exact same thing. We have enemies within who are not only aiming themselves to benefit from these investments in Chinese military or military-related corporations, but are also lassoing regular American people just going about their business with their pension funds and retirement funds and all of this, lassoing them into positions that have nothing to do, one would imagine, with their own personal values. I'm just speaking of slave labor, for example. Roger mentioned that it's military, it's social, it's human rights, it's fiduciary. In every way, we are becoming increasingly vulnerable to China, and it is increasingly invisible to us. Thank goodness, though, for Chairman Moolenaar, who's pushing on this issue as vigorously as anybody can, trying to get corporations to live up to what the president is seeing as crucial, again, for our national security, let alone our financial security. That we are outsourcing this kind of investments in things that we do not believe are okay here on our shores, slave labor, child labor, the damage done to the environment, that's not okay here, but somehow it's okay there. I think if people are made aware of the extent to which their own personal, what they hold dear is being violated elsewhere, I have to believe they would rise up. But it's also putting them in financial peril, and that is unacceptable. We are also always told, it's a classic national security issue or international relations topic, we're not supposed to fight prior wars. We need to look at the current wars. We need to face the situation before us. But again, what every one of the speakers has mentioned, every lesson that we learned from the Cold War, we are eschewing. We are turning our backs on things like you don't fund the enemy, you don't underwrite the enemy, you don't let the enemy buy up your land, you don't let the enemy, you certainly don't finance, as you pointed out, the most extraordinary military buildup in peacetime history by the people who have literally pledged to take you out, to destroy you, to take down your country. It's unconscionable. And I know we've talked about this before. Why is it that this is still even an issue? How is it that China is on a war footing and somehow the United States, we are not able to convey to enough people, and we're working on it, I think we're making headway, that the people are unaware of the war that they have waged on us. And by the way, they want to conquer us, and we simply are not getting ourselves on a war footing. Again, the president is aiming in this direction with the America First policy, investment policy memorandum, and that's all wonderful. It doesn't seem to be sinking deeply enough, quickly enough. Again, China is on a war footing. We are not. We need to recognize that. They have declared war. It is a whole of society war. It should be our job to break them, not to fund them, especially in arenas that pertain to the military. It's bad enough that all roads to our consumer culture, all roads lead through China, if not to China. Everything that we buy is touched by it. And we have such vulnerabilities in all our major areas, not the least of which is military. Somehow we are not breaking ourselves and from this dependency and breaking them thereby. Instead, we are funding them. We are making ourselves increasingly vulnerable. We are empowering them while they are engaging in the biggest military buildup. We're not, or we have not been, and it's time for us to turn that ship around quite literally and figuratively. It's a very scary time. And you've been saying we need to wake up, not be naive. Some of these actions that are being taken by Americans could be construed as treasonous. Thank goodness we have President Donald Trump in the White House who does understand this. And thank goodness we have Chairman Moolenaar pushing on Jamie Dimon and Moynihan on these issues, that there are 14 other companies in the pipeline waiting for American investment to build their own facilities and military capabilities is appalling. This is why you have to nip these things in the bud. And this is why I'm so grateful to you, Frank, and the committee for bringing these things to light to the American people. We need to be aware. We need to stand up and fight. We cannot just go down. We learned this in the Cold War, the original one. And we need to take those lessons. The Chinese learned from it, and we seem to not have. And it's time to take this very seriously. So thank you.
Amen, Karen. Thank you. Let me just add a further thought or two before we open this up to give and take with Karen and Ron, who are with us in person. We're pleased to say. One of the secrets to the impact of these programs is our friend Oleg Atbashin, who, in addition to being the technical genius behind their production and the editing and all the rest of it, is the graphic artist who does these very evocative, opening slides. And I hope at this point in the program, Oleg, you'll call up the one that you did for today, because it speaks to this idea that Chairman Moolenaar talked about, as have several of our other speakers. Accountability for what Wall Street is doing that is clearly at odds with the policy of the United States, clearly at odds with the national security interests of the United States, and clearly at odds even with the interests, to say nothing of the values, the financial interests of their clients, the people whose money is being put at risk, material risk, in communist China. So what Oleg has done is craft wanted posters for Messrs. Dimon and Moynihan, who indeed, as we talk about in this book that Didi Laugesen and I wrote, entitled The Indictment, prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and friends for crimes against America, China, and the world. And the central thesis of the book is we must create costs to people like Jamie Dimon and people like Brian Moynihan, and they're just poster children, if you will, for a larger cohort of folks on Wall Street whose greed and whose indifference, incredibly, even to the well-being of their own families, for heaven's sake. Because should the Chinese, act as they have done recently on one of the line items, one of the lines of attack in their unrestricted warfare, by unleashing a biological attack against our country, or perhaps their children will be induced to take fentanyl inadvertently, or maybe smoke marijuana grown in the kind of operations that we talked about in our program last week in Maine and across this country, with toxic chemicals all over those marijuana plant leaves. Or I don't know, maybe they're children, unlikely as it may seem in some cases on Wall Street. I can't imagine that their children would actually join the military, but should they, maybe they will be killed by submarines equipped with cattle batteries, for example, murdered by the Chinese communists, perhaps in a surprise attack launched against us as part of the opening rounds of a shooting war, which they are increasingly prepared to do. So our purpose is to say, at the minimum, in the court of public opinion, these people need to be prosecuted, tried, and if appropriate, convicted. But perhaps, given what translates, there's a lot of talk, as it's been mentioned by Captain Fennell these days, about treason. But maybe, just maybe, what they are doing will be found in an Article 3 court to be just that, treason. When they know what they are doing is not just sending immense amounts of money, billions, if not trillions of dollars, to our mortal enemy, but thereby enabling them to become more dangerous to all of us. That, to my way of thinking, is treason. So let's open this up. Ron Armstrong, again, you mentioned in your comments this company Goshen. It's also in the battery business. Would you talk about what you and Congressman Moolenaar and others in Michigan, your Stand Up Michigan team notably, and residents in affected areas, which Goshen is poised to despoil, as a sort of case study of what is wrong with the indifference, people like Governor Whitmer in your state, or the state legislature for that matter, have been exhibiting to the Chinese Communist Party threat. And what people, if you could get a little more granular about what people have done in this case to try to prevent these Chinese battery manufacturers from getting their hooks into the state of Michigan.
Well, the first thing, Frank, is I believe that what we are seeing is an undermining of America, not just by the Chinese Communist Party, but by the left themselves. I don't care if it's Michigan or if it's Illinois. Goshen has basically been subsidized by the American taxpayer to come in and set up shop, run by Chinese nationalists, taking over farmland, promising high-paying jobs, and in the end, before they're ever put a brick on the ground to build a building, you realize that those jobs aren't as high paying. But you realize all of the farmland that's been purchased is being purchased with taxpayer money to build Chinese factories that are run by Chinese nationalists, and they always seem to be done in cooperation with democratic people who are undermining America. It's the bottom line, Frank. And fortunately, people like John, and in the case of Michigan and in Illinois, and in Michigan, we had more success because of the demographic, because it happened to be built in a rural area of Michigan, but they were careful in that what they were trying to do was take advantage of the university town that it was in cooperation with a socialist person who's the president of that university, who used to be at another university in, I think it was Grand Rapids Community College. And they basically were going to house these Chinese nationalists on the university within less than 100 miles, by the way, of a major military installation. There are always multiple reasons they do things where they do them. What they didn't and did underestimate is the people themselves. The people rose up together, joined together, and decided that they did not and were not willing, and this is great for JP Morgan, this is great for Bank of America to hear, they were not willing to trade what was committed and promised as high-paying jobs to put at stake their community and their farmland for money. They were not willing to undermine America for that. And they basically continued to change their boards, recalled their boards, and now are elected to super majorities, if not entire boards, controlled by people who represent the long-term vision of those communities. And that is both in Big Rapids Township, in Green Township, and even the board itself of Mecosta County and their city, or I should say their county commission, are now all controlled by people that are putting up one barrier after another to say, we are not interested in you building here, we're not interested in supporting you, and we understand that we're up against your promised great jobs, but we are looking for American jobs, American manufacturing, and not the Chinese Communist Party.
Praise God, and thank you for, again, all you've done to help create that pushback. And I honestly believe to my core that the American investors we're talking about, and there are some that are, big, family office or institutional investors who almost certainly actually do understand what's being done here in these emerging market funds that have been laced with Chinese companies, as Roger says, not just listed, but traded. But I'm sure that the vast majority of people who have pension funds, auto workers, for example, Ron, up in your state, or others across America, people who have just college savings accounts or mutual funds or index funds or exchange traded funds, and don't read the fine print, don't even know where to look for exactly what's in the portfolio. They just want to have a diversified portfolio, maybe one with emerging markets in it. And lo and behold, yes, maybe 30% of those investments are actually now in communist China. And I think, Ron, to your point, if they knew, I think Karen suggested this as well, if they understood both the exposure they have, the risks associated with that exposure, which have not been properly disclosed, and they realize that these are absolutely at odds with their own values, their love of this country, their love, as I say, of whether they're their own family members or not, servicemen and women who are in harm's way, their love of freedom, all of which are at risk because we are underwriting the enemy. I think they will be, to use the old line from Network, the movie, mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. We want to encourage that. Ron, I'm sorry, did you have a comment you want to make?
All I was going to say is that we don't have to look very far back to see what China did when it came to the COVID. They are not a friend. They are indeed a foe. We don't have to look very far back. Only a couple of months ago, and right back here in the state of Michigan, that we had Chinese nationalists bringing in fungus into laboratories at the University of Michigan. And guess who is running that actual lab? It's a Chinese nationalist who is running the lab at University of Michigan, studying ways to basically destroy our crops in America. Why would they not do this in Chinese laboratories in China? Why are they doing it in America? Because they plan on and intend, when the time comes, to basically, affect our food supply. Yes. We have to understand and recognize the enemy, and we have to know, I believe, that the American people, this is an 80-20 issue. If the American people are not interested in both their investments and or their taxpayer money going to undermine America itself and to support the Chinese Communist Party or their army, which of course seeks to destroy us in the long run.
I suspect it's less than 20, actually, if you could get the question put to them properly. Karen, a closing comment from you, if you would. I can't help myself but ask you to share with us once again the adage that you used to such great effect in our roadshow about, our cognitive dissonance about the war we're in.
Yeah, I was thinking that this is the perfect time for that. So thank you for bringing it up. There is a philosophical query where one asks, if a tree falls in the woods and there's nobody there to hear it, does it still make a sound? And during the conferences that we did last year, and every week, every day, I'm reminded that there's an analogous question. If you're in a war and nobody will acknowledge it, can you still lose? And we have been losing. I'm having less of a sense of that nobody will acknowledge it, and increasingly a sense of it's being suppressed. So there's less naivete to do with this than I thought when I originally thought of this. And that's our role. And that's why we are doing exactly what we are doing right here, right now, is screaming that we are in a war. The tree has fallen. It is making a sound. They have been waging war against us. They want to defeat us. They want to conquer us. We know how to fight. And I mean closing the borders. I mean not underwriting the enemy. It's just so much of this is as basic as one could imagine, and yet there's common sense. Right. Do what we know will work to preserve this great nation of ours.
Amen. Karen, this leads me shamelessly to do a plug, if I can, with my dog in tow here. These programs are made possible by the sponsorship of our Institute for the American Future. It helps encourage and support the work of the Committee on the Present Danger China, the Sovereignty Coalition I just mentioned with Ron Armstrong's help, a Victory Coalition, a coalition aimed at making America's military great again. We call it the Save America's Military. And finally, one that is very much engaged in one of the most important symptoms of the spiritual warfare, which I believe animates all of the above, and that is our Save the Persecuted Christians Coalition. I really entreat you at a moment such as this, if you have any sense of the value of these programs, if you understand just how urgent is the need, both to awaken the public and equip them, as Ron Armstrong has been doing, among others, to take action, as John Moolenaar has been doing in the Congress, with support from those of us on the outside. Please consider supporting the work of the Institute for the American Future. It is at usfuture.org. There's a donate page there, and I don't know that I've asked for your help on these programs before, but we really need it now and would be very grateful for your making a tax-deductible contribution to the Institute for the American Future at usfuture.org. With that, we're going to close this show. Dee Dee always points out that one of the things we also urge you to do is to share this video, which will be available in the next day or so when Oleg produces it, as he does masterfully each of these programs. We encourage you to make it widely available within your circles of influence, because at the end of the day, what we do together to raise awareness and take action will make all the difference. God bless you all. Thank you for being here today. Come back for our program next week. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe at presentdangerchina.org. It's free, and it's your life that ultimately may depend upon what you learn here. Take good care. Over now.